Salute for the Fallen began trending worldwide. High schools across America held moments of silence, and even kids who barely knew what World War II was now recognized Walter Jennings's face. Back at the nursing home, Samuel laughed. "You're famous. Now, old man." Walter smirked. "Took me 98 years to become an overnight sensation." But amidst the noise, Walter remained grounded. He was never after fame, just remembrance. Trump's staff called Arya, saying schools wanted Walter to speak. He agreed to a few virtual talks, and during one, a boy named Eli asked, "Mr. Jennings, were you scared in the water?" Walter paused. "Yes," he replied, "but courage isn't not being scared, it's surviving anyway." That quote, too, went viral. But deep inside, Walter knew time was short, and he felt there was one last thing he had to say before it was too late. That night, Walter asked Arya to bring him a pen and paper. "I want to write one last letter," he said. "To who?" Arya asked. "To the future," he replied simply. He spent hours writing, hands shaking, stopping to wipe away tears. When he finished, he placed it in an envelope and handed it to Arya. "Promise me, if something happens, you'll make sure the president gets this?" Walter asked. "Of course," Arya whispered. Walter leaned back, smiling faintly. "Then I've done what I came to do." The letter was sealed, resting beside the man whose story had reignited a nation's soul. 2 days later, Arya entered Walter's room and found him staring quietly out the window. He looked tired. "You okay, Walter?" she asked. He turned slowly. "I think I'm ready, Arya." "Ready for what?" she asked gently. "To join my boys," he replied. That night, Walter closed his eyes and never opened them again. The entire nursing home held a vigil, flags were lowered, and Trump sent a personal statement of condolence. But it wasn't until Arya remembered the envelope that the story took its final turn. At the White House, President Trump received the envelope with solemn hands. The staff watched as he opened it, reading silently. His expression shifted. Surprise. Stillness, then tears. Trump placed the letter on his desk and stood before the press. "I received something today," he said. "The last words of Walter Jennings. I will now read them." The room fell silent as Trump began. "If this is my final message, let it be this. Never forget what it means to serve, not for medals or applause, but for each other. I ask that our nation not build another statue or plaque, but plant trees, one for each life lost in every war. Let them grow as silent sentinels of peace. And if you ever doubt whether one life can matter, remember an old man who floated with ghosts and found purpose again at the end. I salute my commander-in-chief, and I salute the next generation. Carry the torch. Don't let it burn out." The room fell silent. Even the most hardened reporters felt the weight of Walter's final words. They weren't just heartfelt. They were history. Trump called an emergency cabinet meeting. "We're starting the Jennings Grove initiative," he declared. An aide asked, "Sir?" Trump continued, "We'll plant a tree in every state for each fallen veteran, beginning with the 879 lost aboard the USS Indianapolis. Each tree will carry a name." Word spread quickly. Schools, veterans groups, and families joined in. Donations poured in. The first tree was planted on the White House lawn, with Trump himself digging the hole and placing Walter's photo at its base. "This," he said, "is how you make a memory live." Months later, Arya was invited to speak at a Jennings Grove planting in Virginia. Standing before students and veterans, holding Walter's Navy hat, she spoke through a breaking voice. "I was just a nurse," she said, "but he made me a witness to history." She shared Walter's story, the shark-infested waters, the radio messages, the handshake with the president, but she said his greatest act was reminding us that even silence can echo forever if we choose to listen. Back at the nursing home, Samuel sat beside Walter's empty bed. "I told you not to croak before the big stuff happened," he muttered with a tearful grin. He placed a folded note in Walter's drawer. "See ya, topside sailor." Then he saluted and whispered, "They'll never forget you. Neither will I." Across the country, schools adopted the names of fallen veterans, with students planting trees in their honor, learning each name and story. A third-grade girl in Kansas planted a tree for Raymond T. Mills, lost alongside Walter. "I'm taking care of your tree, Mr. Mills," she said into the wind. The Jennings Grove became more than a tribute. It became a classroom without walls. 1 year later, Trump hosted a national tribute at Arlington, reading Walter's full letter, again, and placing a copy in a time capsule to be opened in 100 years. "The torch he passed will stay lit," Trump said, "because it now belongs to all of us." Inspired by Walter, hundreds of elderly veterans came forward with their stories, many for the first time. The initiative created a digital archive, preserving their voices for generations to come. The archive was called Voices of Valor, and every upload began with a single sentence inspired by Walter Jennings. At the edge of Washington, D.C., a new kind of memorial park was unveiled, Jennings Grove National Garden. No statues, just trees, each tagged with a name and a QR code that told a story. Visitors walked in silence, touched the bark, and read memories. It became a sacred, peaceful space, exactly what Walter had wanted. Years later, Eli, the boy who had once asked Walter about fear, stood under a tree bearing Walter's name. Now a young Marine, he removed his cap and saluted. "I remember, sir," he whispered, "and I'll carry the torch." The tree rustled gently as if answering. Walter's quote, "Courage isn't not being scared, it's surviving anyway," was etched into school walls, yearbooks, and memorial stones, becoming part of military school mottos. His words lived on, not in textbooks, but in hearts. A century after Walter's birth, a plaque was placed at the original Jennings tree. Here stood a man who remembered the fallen, reminded the living, and rekindled a nation's soul with his final salute. Above the plaque, the tree bloomed strong and tall, and beneath its branches generations gathered, not to mourn but to remember, because Walter Jennings, a 98-year-old sailor, had spoken his last words, and they had indeed become history. It was a crisp autumn morning in Virginia at a small veterans' nursing home near the Blue Ridge Mountains. 98-year-old Walter Jennings, a World War II Navy veteran, sat by his window, frail but sharp-minded, saluting the flag from his wheelchair as he did every morning. Today, however, something unusual happened. Aria Monroe, a young nurse who had cared for Walter for over a year, walked in holding a letter, her eyes sparkling with disbelief. "Walter," she said gently, "you've been invited to a veterans' tribute ceremony by President Donald Trump himself." Walter raised his trembling hand to adjust his glasses. "Trump? The president wants me?" "Yes," Aria replied with a smile. "Apparently your service story made its way to the White House. He wants to meet you in person." Walter chuckled softly. "I never thought I'd live to see another president, let alone shake hands with one." His roommate, Samuel, an 84-year-old, Korean war vet, looked up and joked, "You better not croak before then, Walt." Everyone laughed, but Walter knew time was precious. He'd lost friends in Okinawa, seen men fall overboard in storms, and lived with decades of silence about the things he witnessed. He never sought praise, but something in this invitation stirred him deeply. "I'll go," Walter whispered, saluting the letter. "For the boys who never made it back." Aria wiped a tear, sensing this trip would change everything. 3 days later, Walter boarded a private military jet, accompanied by Aria and a young Secret Service agent named Ron Wyatt. For a man nearly a century old, Walter carried himself with surprising dignity, back straight, chin up, medals pinned to his blazer. As the plane ascended, he gazed out the window and smiled. It's been 78 years since I've flown above the East Coast. Last time I was heading to war. Arya reached over and squeezed his hand. This time, it's a mission of honor. Ron, intrigued, asked, "You really served in the Pacific Fleet?" Walter nodded. USS Indianapolis. I was one of the radio operators. I survived when she went down. Sharks got many, but I held on to debris until a seaplane found us. Even Ron, trained for stoic professionalism, blinked in disbelief. You were on the Indianapolis? Walter nodded slowly. Most people don't believe me, but I remember every second. Arya whispered, Then the president needs to hear this. America needs to. Walter stared out the window, watching the clouds drift like memories as his heart beat strong. He felt like that young sailor again, full of purpose and courage. He didn't know what awaited him in Washington, but he sensed it wasn't just about recognition. It was about legacy. Walter's arrival in Washington, D.C. was met with unexpected attention. Dozens of reporters lined the gate as his wheelchair rolled down the plane ramp, cameras flashing, and journalists shouting questions. Mr. Jennings, how does it feel to meet the president? What message do you have for younger generations? Walter waved modestly but remained silent. Inside the White House, staff had arranged a small ceremony in the Rose Garden with flags, folding chairs, and veterans of every age. Walter, dressed in his full Navy uniform, was seated in the front row. Arya leaned over and whispered, You look like a hero. Walter chuckled. I'm just a lucky old sailor who lived long enough to be remembered. A hush fell over the crowd as President Trump appeared, wearing a navy blue suit and red tie. He looked directly at Walter, saluted him, and walked over. You must be Walter Jennings, Trump said, extending his hand. Walter struggled slightly but reached out firmly. Then, with trembling knees, Walter stood, returning the handshake with a salute. I am, he said, and I've waited 78 years for someone to ask about the boys who didn't come home. Trump's eyes softened. Then tell me everything. The world should hear it. The cameras were rolling, but in that moment, it wasn't about politics or fame. It was about remembrance, and Walter was finally ready to speak. President Trump led him to the podium, offering him the microphone. Tell us your story, Trump said. Speak for those who can't. Walter's hands trembled as he took the mic. For a moment there was silence. Then, like a wave breaking after years of stillness, the words flowed. I was 20 when I boarded the USS Indianapolis, he began. I sent messages across the seas, never knowing one day I'd send the one that wouldn't be heard. The crowd listened in silence. When we were torpedoed, hundreds were thrown into the Pacific. We floated for days. Sharks circled, hope faded, but some of us held on, for our families, for our country, for each other. Arya wiped a tear from her eye, overcome by his words. Her tears fell, and so did many others. I don't deserve praise, Walter said, his voice cracking, but I beg this nation never forget those who paid with their silence. President Trump placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. Your voice has done them justice. Walter's knees nearly buckled, but his heart was full. After the ceremony, President Trump invited Walter to the Oval Office for a private talk. Seated beside Arya, Walter looked around the historic room. So many decisions made in these walls, he said. Trump nodded. And too many names forgotten in the process. That's why we're changing that. He leaned forward. Walter, we're starting an initiative to document the stories of forgotten veterans. We want you to be the face of it. Walter blinked. Me? At my age? Precisely, Trump replied. Your age isn't a weakness, it's a witness. Walter looked at Arya, then back at Trump. If it means they'll be remembered, I'll do it. There was a long pause before Trump spoke again. Your last words at the ceremony. They moved the nation. Walter smiled. Then let's give the nation more to remember. By morning, Walter's speech had gone viral. News outlets replayed the clip of the frail veteran saluting Trump, followed by his emotional words, while social media exploded with tributes and praise.